stores on this continent. Starbucks' success, in turn, spawned endless copycats to the point where it is now reasonable to expect even the smallest American town to have multiple cafes in the Starbucks style. An abundance of Starbucks-style coffee shops, in turn, made Italian-style coffee drinks accessible and familiar to the American middle-class market for the first time, turning things like espressos, cappuccinos, macchiatos, and lattes from rare dessert treats that you might occasionally get at a fancy restaurant to powerfully ordinary things that people began buying every single day as part of their morning routine. New technology has now even made these once intimidating drinks simple to make for yourself at home. In 2003, the Keurig Corporation released the B100 single cup brewer, which has steadily risen to become America's most popular home espresso machine, now found in 38 million households across the US. This evolution of a style of coffee that was once considered exotic and elite into something expected and routine serves as a good example of the economic prosperity that defined at least the first half of the Lesser 30, and was initially often treated with bemusement by the press as an example of the supposed yuppification of American culture, which is to say the rise of a much more luxurious and snobbish standard of living among the middle class. This seems weird now, but there was a time in which the idea of paying $2 for a coffee was considered almost offensively decadent, with the idea of knowing how to order a caramel macchiato or an oat milk latte something very obnoxious and pretentious. You see this a lot in the pop culture of the 90s, where a character who drinks lattes or espressos is portrayed as being like insufferably trendy.
The incompetence of that man. I very clearly asked for a whisper of cinnamon. He's given me a full-throated shout.
The innovative nature of this new style of coffee was carried over to the aesthetics of the coffee shops themselves, which were once again pioneered by Starbucks as part of Howard Schultz's effort to bring a very specific European cultural vibe to the US. These new types of coffee shops were designed to be cozy places to hang out for long periods of time, which had a big influence on how we think of the act of drinking coffee itself, something relaxing and calm, which is kind of ironic given how much it amps you up. A lot of these aesthetics were also bound up in some of the aspects of the Lesser 30 food culture that we discussed in the previous video, namely the move towards offering more natural and authentic dining experiences, in which customers gravitated towards casual snacks and meals that were very visibly handmade. And thus we got a proliferation of farmhouse chic or pseudo-industrial style coffee shops where cool baristas would hand you a nice porcelain mug of cafe mocha, accompanied by a slice of lavender honey banana bread baked freshly in-house. As the years went on, however, the fanciness of American coffee culture mutated in some rather extravagant ways that ultimately served to downplay the significance of the actual coffee in a number of popular coffee shop drinks. Things like white chocolate frappuccinos, red velvet macchiatos, and of course the notorious pumpkin spice latte became primarily defined by their sugary flavor syrups and high volumes of cream and whipped toppings, which reduced the actual coffee taste to a pretty mild aspect of the overall flavor of the drink. This then had the ironic consequence of making plain black coffee a somewhat rebellious and even slightly snobby thing to order by the end of the Lesser 30, a symbol of one's willingness to opt out of a once highbrow cultural movement that had since grown more than a little basic. The rise of the smoothie movement is pretty similar to the rise of fancy coffee, emerging at around the same time and characterized as a similar symbol of the growing snobification of the American middle class. Smoothies, after all, were also quite expensive drinks by the standards of the time, and had similarly grand pretenses of being luxurious and trendy. So the fact that stores selling them were suddenly popping up everywhere in the late 90s seemed to reflect something similar about how rich and picky Americans were getting. The idea of making a thick drink by blending a bunch of fruits and vegetables together obviously isn't that creative, and drinks like these became much easier to make once blenders started to become a common household object during the great post-war domestic appliance boom. But during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, drinks of this sort weren't that popular and certainly weren't common to sell, except maybe at a flaky new age health food store in San Francisco. So there are two guys who are usually considered the founding fathers of the modern smoothie. Steve Kunu, who was a nurse from Louisiana, who was basically allergic to everything and started selling smoothies to appeal to diet-restricted people like himself. And Kirk Perrin, who was a fitness guy from Caltech, who started selling them as something nutritious that people could drink after their workouts without feeling guilty. Steve's company was known as Smoothie King, and Kirk's was Jamba Juice, and today, of course, they are two of the largest smoothie chains in the United States. Much like Starbucks, their success inspired a ton of smaller copycat smoothie chains and shops, most of which were founded in the late 90s or early 2000s, the era in which smoothie became a household word for the first time. Smoothies were always intended to be drinks for the health conscious, and since there's basically no limit to what you can throw in a blender, people have gotten really creative with smoothie recipes over the last few decades, throwing in all sorts of natural ingredients and promising all sorts of health benefits. You go to your typical smoothie chain these days, and chances are they'll have smoothies claiming to be able to boost your immunity and fight inflammation and cure your cold and even make you smarter. As fitness has continued to become more integrated into mainstream middle-class life, protein smoothies, or shakes if you're a guy, have become quite the hot thing as well, in which you blend in a ton of protein powder to help with your muscle building. Whey and soy-based protein powders are themselves products that have exploded in mainstream popularity over the last few decades, to the point where Americans now spend about $10 billion a year on this stuff, almost all of which goes into smoothies. While we can all agree that smoothies can make for a very delicious treat, there is a lot of debate as to whether or not they are actually as good for you as Big Smoothie would have you believe. Much like fancy coffee, a lot of commercial smoothies are very high in sugar and cream and things, while a lot of the vitamin concoctions that they put in are too small to really do much. But they are still a much more healthy thing to reach for than the next style of beverage that rose to power during the Lesser 30, which is energy drinks. I actually did an audit of my local 7-Eleven as part of my research for this video, and I found that energy drinks are now by far the most popular beverage they sell, occupying a full 3 coolers compared to only 2 for soda and 1 for water. According to this New York Times story, they are a nearly $20 billion industry, making them twice as big as protein shakes and basically the same as coffee shop coffee, which is pretty incredible. The kickoff to the American energy drink craze is, of course, usually credited to the Red Bull Corporation, which is an Austrian company that began selling its iconic high caffeine, high sugar drink in the States in 1997. Americans hadn't really heard of the concept of energy drinks at the time. And if you were a teen or a young adult in the late 90s or early 2000s, you probably remember how aggressively the Red Bull people marketed themselves with catchy ads and publicity stunts, pitching their product as something that revitalizes body and mind. Red Bull was soon joined by a Made in America energy drink, Rockstar, which was founded in 2001 by Russ Weiner, who I was surprised to learn is the son of the notorious right-wing radio guy Michael Savage. It was joined a year later by Monster, created by 2 friends who had immigrated from South Africa. And of course, now we have Prime as well, created by old What's-His-Face in 2022. On Monster's website, they brag that Monster is the world's greatest skiers and skaters, boarders and bikers, rockers and racers, gamers and girls. Which I feel kind of sums up the role that energy drinks have come to play in American culture since their debut. Because they amp you up with so much caffeine and sugar, they've become associated with anything in our culture that requires abnormal levels of physical endurance, whether that be a UFC fighter or just some guy who stays up until 3 a.m. every night streaming. It's one of the paradoxes of the Lesser 30 that while on the one hand we had things like smoothies and coffee that leaned hard into the idea of nature and authenticity, we also had stuff like Bang Energy Purple Haze or C4 Cosmic Rainbow that openly leaned into their artificiality and kind of owned it as something cool. When you hear business analyst types attempt to explain why energy drinks have proven so popular in the context of a culture that is otherwise drifting in the direction of health consciousness and authenticity, the main answer you tend to get is just functionality.